Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the book of Judges, chapter 5. And we were in the middle of reading about the episode of the defeat by the prophetess and the judge Deborah, the female prophetess and judge Deborah, and Barak, the general of the army, who led the people under the leadership of Deborah to defeat the armies of Sisera, who was the general of the oppressive king of Canaanite King Yavin. We read of the defeat as Barak charged down the mountain, leading thousands of Israelite soldiers, charged down Har Tavar, Mount Tavar, into the Kishon Valley, where Sisera and his iron chariots and mighty army were encamped. Barak successfully shook up the army, caused tremendous amount of confusion and slaughtered the army. And we learned of the episode of how, as Sisera was running for his life away from Barak and his troops, how he tried to seek refuge at the tent of Yael, who he thought would be friendly to him. Yael hid him in his tent, and in the end, Yael assassinated Sisera. So we learned of how these two women, and Deborah and Yael, and one man, Barak, led the Jewish people to victory. Now, the exact happenings, like what exactly happened, why was it that Barak was able to successfully take on Sisera's army, was not made clear in the last chapter, and we will hopefully find some hints in this coming chapter as to what may have happened, what somewhat miraculous or fortuitous events occurred that allowed Barak to attack Sisera. Certainly it wasn't surprise, which did help the Israelite army under Joshua in some of the wars, because they were not surprised. They were expecting an attack. Sisera, in fact, came to camp there because he had heard an intel from Yael's husband that the people were gathering there. So why was Sisera able to be conquered so easily? There's something that was left out of the story. Now in chapter 5, we read, what we're about to begin is one of the most remarkable works of poetry in Tanakh. It is a song written by Deborah and sung by Deborah on the occasion of the victory. And in this song, we do hear a lot of details that give us hints as to who exactly Yael was. We get hints as to what exactly happened during this battle to allow Barak to have such what seemed to be such an easy victory over such a mighty army. Remember, this was an army that had been oppressing the people for many, many years. This was not, and it was a powerful army with the most modern weaponry of the time. So, but more, and we learn a lot of lessons from this song. Another thing that it's important to remember, this may remind us of some of the things we studied. Those who have been studying together with me since the beginning of this podcast, when we read the works of Isaiah and many of the 12 minor prophets, and we read a lot of prophecies that were written in a poetic style and difficult language, written in a way that they should not necessarily rhyme, but with a meter, and sometimes a rhyme, written to be understood and sung or spoken in prose in Hebrew. And when one writes in poetry, the language is kind of sometimes difficult to interpret. What exactly did they mean? So interpreting it and in general, and then translating it into another language such as English, becomes a challenge. So here, until now in the book of Judges, and those who have been studying the book of Joshua, this has mostly been narrative. It's relatively easy to translate. I mean, of course, there's words here and there that people can debate over their meaning, but for the most part, it read easily and quickly. When we read now, a lot of what I'm going to say, similar to when I studied Isaiah and those other books, is going to be interpretations, and I'm going to bring different interpretations, and I'm going to try my hardest to convey a sense of what the original Hebrew says, but sometimes different translations can lead to a very different meaning. But I'll do my best to let the prophet speak. So let's begin. Vatoshar Devorah, and Devorah sang, Uvarak ben Avinoam, and also Barak the son of Avinoam, Bayomahu, on that day, the day of this great victory, Lamar saying as follows. And for those of you that have been with me this whole time know that I translate the word Lamar as follows. There's a lot of debate as to how to translate the Hebrew term Lamar, but I've been consistent with that. Now it says here, and Deborah sang, and Barak ben Avinoam. So it's like he was a kind of a add-on. He also sang. But the primary song is the song of Deborah, the song that she sang, and that's how it has been known, Shirat Deborah. That's how it's been known to posterity and history as her song. It becomes clear as we go through the song itself that it was Deborah primarily that wrote it and sang it. Verse 2 is the next verse, the beginning of the song. It already highlights the issue of the difficulty of translating. And here goes, Bifro'a piraot b'Yisrael. And I'm not going to translate it easily. I'm going to tell you the different possible translations because there are many different possible meanings. One simple meaning, and this has made it into most modern Jewish translations, such as the JPS, which I use very often, looks at this word. It all centers, the debate over the meaning of this phrase all centers on the meaning of the word of the shoresh, of the root, fe resh ayin, lefro'a, bifro'a piraot. So the first one is looking at it in the language of gadel pera, we find in the Torah, growing hair, right? Pera being, those that are familiar with the Talmud know the term peri'ah means the term letting one's hair grow. So probably the most literal translation of the words is when the people of Israel allow their hair to grow. Bifro'a piraot b'Yisrael, when they let their hair down. Now exactly what that means, what does she mean when she says when the people of Israel grow out their hair? Hair presumably would mean a sign of strength, as we'll see later on in this book with the story of Samson. Hair being a sign of someone's virility and strength. So Bifro'a piraot b'Yisrael would then mean when the people of Israel are strong. And then the next phrase, B'hitnadev when the nation becomes dedicates themselves with hitnadvut, Baruchu Adonai. That's when you, all of you that she's singing the song to, should praise God. In other words, when the people are strong physically and they are mitnadvim, they are dedicated in their hearts, that's when we praise God. In other words, the people have to be both physically strong and in their heart strong. That's one possible potential meaning. Now, when we look at the most medieval commentaries, Jewish commentaries at least, translate the term differently, and it has a different meaning. So another possible meaning, and if we look in Exodus chapter 4, when Moses and Aaron present themselves before Paro, before the Pharaoh in Egypt, and ask Pharaoh to ease up the burden on the people and to let them go to worship God. Pharaoh says, Lama Moshe ve'Aaron, why Moses and Aaron tafriu et ha'am mima'asab? Why are they making the nation turn away from, right, neglect their duties, right? So the language tafriu means to, when people neglect, when they leave aside, when they don't do what they were, when they're free, and this is not a good sense of free, but free from their yokes, all their responsibilities. They neglect their responsibilities. If that's the case, and this is also, we see similar meaning in Mishlei when it says Reish v'kolon porea musar, when someone neglects musar, when he neglects rebuke, right? And the end result, it leads to abandon and disgrace. We see that in Mishlei chapter 13. Be'ein chazon yiparam, when there's no leadership, when there's no vision, the nation goes and neglects its duties. That's also in Proverbs 29, verse 18. So Chazal, the rabbis, and Rashi take this approach that Bifro'a piraot b'Yisrael means when the people of Israel abandon their duties So in other words, it's reflecting the time when the people abandon their duty to worship God and to be faithful to God, and they go off and they wander into the worlds of idolatry and immorality and so on. Then, like the Medrash and the Talmud use this as something bad. So the people, when they turn off in the bad direction, but then behitnadevam, when the people then start turning back to God, Baruchu Adonai, the way to do that is by blessing God. So, which is the origin of the saying that the Talmud says, when God has an evil decree against the people, that's what happens when people neglect their duty. Before apiraot b'Yisrael, then behitnadev when people want to turn around, and when that the suffering inspires them to turn back, what do you do? Baruch Hashem, you look and turn to God and pray and repent. So that would be another way of understanding this verse. A third way is to look at, and this is the way of the Mitzudot and the Radak, when we see in the Torah, the Targum of Nakam, right? The Aramaic translation of the word revenge is priya, and we know in the Talmud the language of lifroa is to repay, right? Which could be both good and bad, but it could be lifroa, to avenge from someone. When you feel someone is indebted to you and they're not paying back, you take revenge. So bifroa piraot b'Yisrael would then mean, according to those interpretations, bifroa piraot b'Yisrael, when the people, right, of Israel are ready to take revenge, be it nadev when the people get together, right? So then, when this is how the Mitzudos translates it as follows: Before apirot b'Yisrael, when God wants through Israel to take His revenge, this occurs behit nadev when the people of the nation are ready to dedicate themselves. Baruch Hashem, bless God for doing this, right? For using the Israelites to take His revenge against the evil, oppressive nations, and He does this as a result of the fact that Hitnadev the people have dedicated themselves. This verse highlights what I started today's podcast with, how these three very dramatically different translations of this verse result in an extremely different lesson, extremely different understanding, and that's the difficulty of translating poetry. But there we have it. Three possible approaches, three possible translations. I just wanted to mention, I noticed in some of the Christian translations from the King James Version all the way on to now, somehow bifro'ah meant that when leaders lead. I'm not exactly sure. There must be a scholarly way that they came to that interpretation. I honestly don't know what the background of that translation is. I think the three translations I just gave should be adequate. If you're looking in a translation that's from a non-Jewish source, you may see something very different, that it's referring to leadership. I am somewhat interested in knowing that, but I think we've kind of beat that pasuk up as much as we need to. Verse 3. So, bless God. We just ended verse 2. Verse 3 starts as follows. She now turns, Deborah now turns, Shim'u milachim, listen up, all you kings. Ha'azinu roznim, hear me, listen carefully, all of you. Roznim here is translated variously, other types of leaders. Now here, Deborah is standing as the leader of the Jewish people at this time. Here you have a woman who is a prophetess, she is a judge, and she just led a major military victory. She turns to all of the kings around her and says, Anochi, I, meaning I, Deborah, Ladonai, I am for God. Anochi, Ashira, I sing, I will sing. Azamer, to whom shall I sing? Ladonai Elohei Yisrael, to God, the Lord of Israel. These are extremely powerful words. Deborah is here clearly differentiating between her and her leadership versus the type of leadership that was so common among the rest of the leaders and kings in those days. Every other king takes credit in his greatness or in his being. They would almost make themselves, in many cases, they did make themselves into gods. It is my power, my awesome might, my greatness, my wonder, my this, my that makes me so powerful and great, and so on and so forth. This is how the kings in those days used to do. Deborah turns to the kings at the height of her power, at the height of her greatness, at the height of her leadership, when she has just managed to defeat a mighty army, and she immediately says, Anochi Lashem, I am for God. Anochi, what do? Ashira, I sing praise to God. And whose God do I sing praise to? Who takes credit? And you're going to see this theme develop as we read it. Lashem Elokei Yisrael. The reason why we won is because God is the God of Israel, the people. I led the people, and it is because, like I just said in the last verse, hit Nadev because the people dedicated themselves that God saved them. I'm not taking any credit to myself. This is an extremely powerful statement of Deborah, and something that we should think about for a moment before we move on to the next thing. Now, Deborah just turned her attention to God. So Deborah says, Adonai b'tzeitcha mi Seir. God, when you left Seir. Now there are various understandings of this verse, but clearly she's hearkening back to an old time. And now remember, they had just had this massive military victory. So Deborah, and I'm going to choose the Radak and the Even Ezra's approach here. Rashi and others, Mitsudos, take the tack that this is referring to the Torah. When you left Seir, and that's referring to Sinai, the receiving of the Torah at Sinai, and they take a certain approach. It's worth looking at their approach. I'm going to take the Radak's approach and the Even Ezra's approach, that they felt that this is looking back at the previous wars and victories. When did the history of the Jewish people and their wars of conquest begin? It happened after they left Egypt, after they were in the desert, and then they started to approach the land of Israel. The first major wars were as they passed the lands of Edom. B'tza'adcha, as you walked past Mistei Edom, from the fields of Edom, the verse continues. Those were the first nations encountered by the people under the leadership of Moshe. And as we read about in the Torah, they fought wars against nations there, the Sichon Melech Amori and Og Melech Bashan. Those wars were fought, and those wars were won. So Deborah is looking back at God when he fought those, when he gave to the people. Now, Deborah explicitly does not go back here and refer back to the Exodus of Egypt, because there, and we've seen this before, we've seen this in Joshua, where the Exodus from Egypt was all God, without much from the people. But as they approach the land of Israel, there's more and more people involved, and less overt God involved. So Deborah therefore goes back to when the people fought the wars, not when God fought the wars. So, but that's the special relationship. Azamer LaHashem Elokei Yisrael was how it led into this verse. Hashem mitzeischa mi Seir b'tzadcha mistei Edom. When you left Seir and when you walked past the fields of Edom, what happened? Eretz Roasha, the land shook. Gam shamayim notafu, even the heavens poured forth their water. Gam avim notfu mayim, the clouds poured forth their water. Now, what does this mean? That on the surface, what this means is that the heavens poured forth their water, because the people fought their enemies and won, and the heavens fought along with them. Now, this also might give us a hint. And I've seen this in some more modern commentaries, that what happened to the armies of Sisera was, now remember, Sisera was encamped in Nachal Kishon. Anyone that is familiar with Nachal Kishon would know that it is a wadi, just like many wadis in the region. It's in a low valley, which is typically dry, surrounded by mountains, and when there's rain upon the mountains, the Nachal will suddenly fill with water, in a rapid way without much warning. And if it's very heavy, the wadi might overflow and turn the valley into mud. And this gives us a hint as to what happened. Why was it that Sisera got stuck, and why was it that his chariots didn't get anywhere and weren't able to help him? All of his, and the hint here of Deborah is telling us that God, you came out with us and brought us through those great victories against Sichon and Og, and you brought us here, and here the heavens poured forth water, the clouds poured forth their rain, and that's how you brought forth victory. This continues in verse 5. Harim nazlu mipnei Adonai. Those mountains poured forth their water from before God. Think of an image of Har Tovar, Mount Tovar, with pouring its water that's flowing down from the rain into Nahal Kishon, and brought us victory. Zeh Sinai. This is Sinai. Now here is where Deborah pivots from the great military victories and the miracles that God fought, so to speak, alongside the people to bring about these victories. And here, Zeh Sinai. This is Sinai. This is the special relationship that began when God made this special covenant with the Jewish people that was based on the Torah. Mipnei Adonai Elohei Yisrael. This is what happens before the God, the Lord of Israel. So God made this special covenant at Sinai, and then from that flowed forth all of those victories. Now, Deborah looks towards leadership and an incredible display of humility. Again, she started off this song with humility, telling the other kings, I don't take credit for myself and make myself into a god. I look to God and I sing. Immediately she looks to judges who preceded her. Bimei Shamgar ben Anat. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anat, we read about Shamgar. He was the Shofet who defeated the Philistines with his ox goad. Bimei Yael. In the days of Yael. Now this hint, and Rashi points out that this sounds very much like Deborah is saying that Yael, who we only know now as a woman who was brave and took Sisera into her tent and assassinated him. But it seems from here that Yael was also a shofetes, a judge in her own right, and was actually a leader beforehand. Because she says, Bimei Yael, in the days of Yael, comparable to Bimei Shamgar, who we know Shamgar was a shofet. But Yael was also famous, interestingly, for her weapon of choice, which was a tent peg. Shamgar was an ox goad, and Yael was a tent peg. In other words, they used measly farm implements, or implements that farmers would have, chadlu arachot. But in their days, their leadership was not enough. Their leadership wasn't good enough, because chadlu arachot, the people going on the paths, which is referring to commerce. People were afraid to take the paths on the roads. They were afraid to travel from place to place. V'holchei nitivot, those that walked through the pathways, through the wilderness, transporting things from one place to another. Yelchu al arachot akalkalot. They had to take side paths in order to avoid the oppressing armies of Yavin that were, oppressing the people, harassing the people, taking taxes from the people, etc. Chadlu pirazon b'Yisrael. This is verse 7. Chadelu. Those Israelites who lived out in the fields and farmed out in the fields, and the spread out cities and towns and villages that were unprotected, those towns of Israel, the villages ended. People ceased. Why? Because they all had to go into the walled cities for protection from the marauding armies. All of the people out in the field were gone. People weren't traveling on the roads. Commerce was over. People were afraid and cowering behind the walls in the cities. Those leaders were not enough. Ad shakamti Deborah, until I, Deborah, stood up. Now this might sound a little bit arrogant or haughty, but as we'll see from the context, it won't feel that way in a moment. She's still maintaining. She's simply stating it required me and my leadership to get up. Shakamti Eim Israel. I stood up as a mother in Israel. We see now how Deborah looked at herself, how she viewed herself. She viewed herself as a mother who cares about her children and stood up to the challenge when someone needed to stand up to the challenge. Yivchar, this is verse 8, Elohim Chadoshim, the people, when they had chosen other gods, Oz Lochem Sha'arim. That is when there were warriors, right? I'm sorry. Yivchar Elohim Chadoshim, when the people of Israel chose other gods, new gods for themselves, and they abandoned God himself. Az lachem sha'arim, were there warriors in the gates? Did they have the hitnadvut? Did they have the morale to stand as warriors in the gates of the cities to defend themselves? No, they were vulnerable. Mogain im yera'eh varomach. Did anyone see a shield or a spear? The Arboim Elef B'Yisrael, among the 40,000 fighters of Israel? No, we saw nothing. No one got up to defend it because their morale was weakened, because they were involved and steeped in idolatry and immorality. However, my heart, Deborah says in verse 9, Libi, my heart, lechokekei Yisrael. My heart was together with all of those leaders of Israel. Here Deborah doesn't take credit for himself. As a mother, as a mother in Israel, Deborah realized that she has to inspire the leadership of Israel and get inspiration from the other leaders. And as a term that she uses to describe the leaders, she uses chokekei. A chokek is one who is a legislator, who makes law, right? And in a specific reference here, remember she stated Zeh Sinai. It was the relationship that started at Sinai. The chokekei Yisrael are the religious leaders. She says, my heart is with them, with these leaders. Hamitnadvim ba'am, and my heart is with those people in the nation, not just those leaders, but the people and the real leaders, right? But I'm also with those among the nation who are mitnadvim, who are dedicated, who are ready to stick with it. They're not going to be Yivchar Elohim Chadashim. They're not going to be the ones who choose the other gods, but the ones who are dedicated to the principles that Israel is supposed to stand for. Baruch Hu Adonai. All of you bless God. Remember, Deborah is putting her peg and her strength and her inspiration from those that lead the people properly, those that are mitnadvim, those that are dedicated to God. And then she turns her praise towards God. So again, she deflects credit from herself and puts credit on the other chokekei Yisrael and the other leaders of Israel, even though those other leaders of Israel didn't stand up to lead and lead the people to victory. Only she did. Even Barak, remember we learned last time, even Barak, who did follow her and did lead the people, refused to take on the leadership himself without Deborah in charge and Deborah on top of him. Rochvei asonot tzichorot. Those who ride on skinny donkeys, yoshvei al midin v'holchei al derech, those that sit on the saddle rugs, and those that go upon the roads, sichu, tell people about it. Remember, those are the ones that had to avoid the highways. Those are the ones that couldn't perform their deliver merchandise and travel from city to city because of the harassing, marauding armies. Those are the people, tell the story because they see it. They saw firsthand what it used to be before her victory and how order was reestablished, commerce was reestablished after her victory. Mikol, and now I'm going to complete the 5a here. This is the last verse I'm going to read now, and we're going to continue in the next one. But Mikol mechatzesim bein mashabim. This is interesting. It's another place where there's different ways of understanding it. But one way of reading it would be the more modern translators, like the JPS, translate it this way: Mikol mechatzesim bein mashabim, louder than the sound of mechatzesim, meaning archers, which one hears when one is out in the places where we draw water, because the archers, louder than the sounds of those marauding armies, which one hears when one is outside the walled city getting water and so on. Sham yitanu tzidkos Adonai. Those places, in other words, where we used to hear those mechatzetzim, those archers, those warriors, now instead let us say and declare the righteousness and greatness of God. Another way of understanding this verse, which is the way the Radak explains it, is Mikol mechatzetzim ben mashabim. You used to be afraid, right, of the archers when you went out to draw water, right? Those of you who used to be afraid when you went there, Sham yitanu tzidkos Adonai, now go and give and say praise to the righteousness of God. Tzidkot pirzono b'Yisrael, the righteousness of of how he has the language pirazon we translated before as the people that were spread out, the righteousness of how God is spread out among the people of Israel. Oz yardu la'sharim am Adonai. That's when did the people come to the gates to defend themselves? When did they have the moral strength? The nation of God, when did they have the moral strength? When they were praising God and giving Yitanu to Kos Hashem. This is key to understanding this first half of the Song of Deborah, which we're going to continue and hopefully complete in the next podcast. And that is that when do the people's morale, when do they stand up to defend themselves? Only when they have the bond with God. Only when they understand and appreciate their uniqueness, their specialness, and why, because they have this bond and relationship with God. Without that, they're just like everyone else, and they don't have the morale to stand up for themselves, and they don't defend themselves. So the theme, if I had to boil it down to one primary theme that we just studied, that is that without our, Deborah is telling the people, without the reason why under Yael and Shamgar it wasn't enough to rescue the people was because you did not have that special bond. You did not appreciate your bond with God. Once you realized and you turned your heart to the Chokekei Yisrael, to the Mitnadvim Ba'am, once you got that message, that's when you had the strength to stand up and fight. Thank you so much for paying attention to Judges 5a. Looking forward to studying 5b, and of course the rest of this beautiful book of Judges together.